The gym was colder than expected, lit in soft rows of fluorescent white polished floors, echoing under the stomp of military boots. In the middle of the noise, a woman stepped in quietly, her black joggers and faded olive jacket catching none of the attention that seemed to bounce around the room. She moved without hesitation, without greeting, just a quiet pace that cut across the space like a shadow no one invited. A few heads turned, not out of welcome, but curiosity laced with smirks. Someone whispered near the weight rack something about HR losing another admin in the wrong building. Laughter followed, not loud, but sharp enough to land between shoulders like a tap that turns into a bruise. She didn't seem to hear them. Or maybe she had learned to listen differently. Her hair was tied back with a simple black ribbon, her sneakers worn at the heel, and her face unreadable in that way that unsettles people who rely on reactions to feel in control. A name tag stitched into her jacket read Miller. No rank, no title, just letters, faded by time. She scanned the bracket board quietly, fingers tucked into her pockets and the corners of her mouth neither lifted nor dropped. Behind her, another joke rolled out low and careless. Something about Runway Barbie asking for directions. She didn't turn. She didn't even pause. Somehow the moment still shifted. Maybe it was the way she didn't look lost, or maybe it was that stillness she carried like armor. She wasn't there to ask for space. She was there because she had already claimed it. Section 1. Character Introduction. Quinn, the quiet one. Quinn Miller lived in a small second-floor apartment just outside the Edgefield base where the walls were plain, and the quiet was a comfort rather than a void. Her mornings started early, not from alarm, but from habit. She moved with a kind of purpose that didn't draw attention, but left things precisely in place. Her kitchen was clean, not sterile, with a single teapot that she used daily, and a plant on the windowsill that tilted toward the sun, like it trusted her to open the blinds. The bed was always made tight corners, folded neatly. Her shoes lined up at the foot like soldiers in waiting. On the desk sat an old photo frame turned face down the glass, a little scratched at the edges. She worked in base logistics, tucked behind spreadsheets, shipment logs, and scheduling charts. Her badge didn't carry rank, but she was never late, never out of place. People at the office barely noticed her unless something was missing, and when it was found again, no one asked how. Quinn was 38 with a calm presence and a kind of stillness that made others speak a little faster as if trying to fill the space. Her hair was often pulled back low and clean, her eyes steady, the kind you didn't want watching you lie. She didn't wear makeup, didn't speak about her weekends, and didn't decorate her workspace beyond a small ceramic dish for paper clips. What most people missed was how deliberate she was. She didn't slouch. She didn't fidget. When she listened, her eyes didn't drift, and when she walked, it was with the confidence of someone who had once memorized movement like it was language. There were no trophies in her home, no certificates on the wall, no display cases. But in a drawer beneath a folded white uniform sat a black belt softened at the edges, its color faded not from disuse but from repetition. Near it, tucked neatly in a cloth pouch, were a few medals without ribbons. One had a name etched in Japanese. Another was bent at the edge like it had been caught in a suitcase. She hadn't competed in years, not since everything changed, but the form never left her. She still stretched each morning in silence, her breath steady, her posture flawless. She still ran her fingers along the seams of her old uniform once a week before tucking it away again. People called her quiet. Some said it like a compliment, others like a warning. But none of them understood that silence was not the absence of voice. It was the result of choosing not to explain yourself to people who already decided what they wanted to see. Quinn never interrupted meetings. She never corrected others even when they got things wrong. She let assumptions hang in the air until they ran out of weight. What she lacked in visibility, she made up for in gravity. There had been a time long ago when her name was printed in bold letters on rosters and match flyers, when crowds chanted and lights pulsed and coaches shouted commands. She remembered that time with clarity, not longing. It wasn't that she missed it. It was that it had never really left her. Her silence wasn't hiding. It was holding. And for Quinn Miller, holding her truth quietly had always been harder and more powerful than proving it loudly. Section 2. Setting the stage. The Gym of Judgments. 2.1. Where looks matter more than skill. The Edgefield-based gym looked more like a private training center than anything standard issue. Its polished hardwood floors reflected overhead lights and clean lines, and everything from the chrome lockers to the digital performance boards felt curated. The walls held framed photos of past champions, all sharp-jawed, all in uniform, all male. Music played low from a hidden speaker system, something upbeat but forgettable enough to set a rhythm without breaking conversation. Most of the men moved with a looseness that came from knowing the space was built around them. They spoke in clipped tones, sometimes loud, sometimes just enough to be overheard by those they wanted to notice. Quinn stepped through the entrance without hesitation, but the room still paused by instinct. Not for her exactly, just long enough for people to mark that something didn't quite fit. Her presence was quiet, but it pulled focus the way silence does in a loud room. She wasn't in uniform. No rank on her chest, no name on her sleeve that matched anyone's memory. Her black gym bag didn't carry any visible patches. Her hair was tied back in the same way she always wore it. The only sound was the soft tread of her sneakers on the mat. One cadet near the water station gave a quick glance before going back to his bottle. Another leaned toward his friend, nodding subtly in her direction, the kind of gesture that didn't need words. A trainer at the far end of the mat looked up, held her gaze a beat too long, then turned back without greeting. The energy wasn't hostile, not directly. It was just tilted, calibrated toward exclusion. She wasn't part of the rotation. No one moved to make space or offered a nod of acknowledgement. Her presence didn't register as threat or ally, just anomaly. The group moved in sync, their drills clean, their uniforms pressed, their hierarchy visible in the way they lined up. Lane, the lead instructor, stood near the center, voice calm but clipped as he issued commands. He didn't look at her right away, but others did. Quinn didn't speak. She set her bag down carefully by the wall and knelt to unlace her shoes. Her posture was centered, her expression neutral. She didn't ask where to stand or who to follow. She didn't look lost, but she also didn't act like someone expecting a welcome. The room adjusted around her, not warmly, not rudely, just enough to remind her she was not expected. Not here. Not like that. The judgment wasn't loud, but it was present in every glance, every step that didn't shift to make room, every comment not spoken but understood. 2.2 Runway Barbie arrives. A few cadets near the gear racks were the first to say it. One leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, and asked if anyone had seen HR lose their admin again. Another smirked and called her Runway Barbie, nodding toward her jacket like it was part of a costume she forgot to take off. The laughter wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It rolled in waves, light enough to pass for friendly, sharp enough to leave a mark. One guy near the lockers muttered that she must have wandered in looking for the yoga class. His friend added she probably Googled how to tie that belt this morning. Quinn didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She knelt by her bag and pulled out her uniform with a kind of care that made the rest of the room seem rushed by comparison. She folded her jacket neatly before setting it aside and began changing, methodical, unhurried. Behind her, someone mimicked a dramatic bow and almost fell over. More laughs, hushed this time, the kind that carry when people pretend they're trying to keep it quiet. A cadet near the bench tossed a spare white belt toward her feet and said, "Tourists should at least match." She picked it up calmly, folded it, and placed it next to her bag without a word. Her face didn't tighten. Her hands didn't shake. She adjusted her sleeves and tied her gi with the kind of practiced motion that no one seemed to notice for what it was. Lane finally walked over, grinning in that effortless way some men wear authority. He told her this wasn't the base's self-defense seminar, not the one they run for spouses. His voice was light, but his eyes scanned the room for reactions. Quinn nodded once the smallest movement and stepped onto the mat. No one moved to pair up with her. Lane sent her to the side to watch drills like she might learn something. The rest followed suit. They kept her just close enough to include, but far enough to avoid. Phones came out again. Screens turned just slightly away from her. Someone behind her whispered in a falsetto voice, asking if posture counted toward points. She stood still, arms at her sides, eyes focused straight ahead. They laughed like boys who thought they were safe. She stood like someone who didn't need to convince them otherwise. Section 3. Conflict. The quiet humiliation. 3.1. The unseen battle. Lane called for everyone to gather near the center of the mat. His voice carried easily, practiced and confident, the kind that filled a room without needing to rise. He said they'd start with basic takedown techniques and that they'd be using a volunteer. He didn't ask for one. He just looked at Quinn. Then he gestured for her to join him in the middle. She walked out, slowly bowed once, and stood where he directed, her hands relaxed at her sides. The first throw was exaggerated. He shifted her weight off balance and sent her to the ground with a quick twist. It wasn't rough, but it wasn't gentle either. His movement was loud, bigger than necessary, and it earned a few chuckles from the sidelines. Quinn got up without help. She didn't adjust her belt or glance at anyone around her. She just reset her stance. Lane smiled at the crowd, then did it again. Each time the throw looked more like theater than instruction. The cadets didn't hide their amusement. One pretended to count the falls under his breath. Another recorded with his phone held low against his thigh. Someone added a whisper about how she'd make a great crash dummy if this whole admin thing didn't work out. She hit the mat again, this time harder. Not enough to hurt, just enough to echo. Lane laughed, told the group to watch her balance like she was part of the lesson. The laughter was scattered but steady. No one interrupted. No one looked uncomfortable. Each fall was followed by silence on her part. No sighs, no flinches. Just the sound of her breath steadying as she stood again. She didn't challenge him. She didn't stiffen or resist. She simply let it happen. One cadet clipped a short video and added a caption before the session was over. It hit the group chat before they even started cooldown. It showed Quinn on the mat, rolling onto her side lane, standing over her with that same practiced grin. The text read, "Pilot down again." The others laughed quietly, watching the loop on their phones. A few nodded to each other. The ones who didn't laugh stayed silent. Not because they disagreed, just because there was no need to speak when someone else was already doing the work. Quinn stepped to the side during partner drills. Lane didn't assign her anyone. He told her to stretch near the wall, maybe join next time. No one questioned it. It felt understood. From her corner, she folded her sleeves twice and watched the room like a shoreline watches the tide. They didn't know what she was thinking. Most didn't care. To them, she was just part of the background, the quiet one they could throw without worry, the one who never pushed back. 3.2. The Drawer of Secrets. The apartment was quiet when Quinn stepped inside. The hallway light cast a soft glow across the hardwood floor where her boots left a faint trail of dust from the base. She set her bag down carefully, not because it was heavy, but because everything in her space had its place. The kettle on the stove was still warm from that morning. A single plant reached toward the last of the afternoon sun. Its leaves tilted like they remembered her hand. She moved slowly through the room, shedding her jacket, then stopped by the low drawer near her bed. She opened it with both hands, not rushed, not hesitant. Inside were objects no one on base had ever seen. A folded GI, white and clean. A black belt frayed at the edges, the fabric worn from repetition. Beneath them, medals lay tucked in cloth. One had a corner bent as if caught in luggage or slammed in a drawer too fast once. There were old press clippings, some in English, some in Japanese. A headline called her unstoppable. Another didn't mention her name, only the upset she caused. The memory returned not as a scene, but as weight. A crowded arena. A judge's nod. A man in a suit who approached her after a qualifying match with a handshake and a promise. All she had to do was step aside. Make room for someone else's son. It would be easier for everyone. She refused. 2 weeks later, rumors spread like oil in water. Her matches were pulled from archives. Sponsors vanished. Officials whispered about violations. She was accused of breaking form, hiding her real training, working in secret styles not recognized by the Federation. Her teacher never denied her. He was already old, his dojo tucked away behind the trees in Okinawa. He stood by her silently even when others turned away. She remembered his hand on her shoulder after her final test, the floor still warm from their sparring. He looked at her and said, "Keep it clean, keep it quiet." She hadn't worn the belt in public since, not because she lost faith, but because some truths didn't need to be shown to be real. She ran her fingers along the stitching, now feeling the years softened into the threads. The laughter from that day at the gym still echoed in her ears, but in this room, in this drawer, the noise couldn't follow. Here, the silence was her own. Not forced, not empty, just steady. She folded the G again and placed it back the way it had been. The belt went on top, centered like always. Then she closed the drawer and stood there a moment longer, not looking back at it, not needing to. What mattered had never left her. It had only gone quiet. Section 4. Inner world, still water runs deep. The bracket board went up on a Tuesday. It was mounted in the lobby between the fitness wing and the officers' lounge, framed in silver with a digital screen that refreshed every hour. Names began to fill in fast. Most were familiar: cadets, instructors, a few returning champions. The last slot blinked empty, holding space for a final sign-up. Quinn saw it that morning on her way to the gym. She paused only a moment long enough to scan the list. Then she moved on. She didn't linger. She didn't ask anyone about it. But that night she came back when the hallway was quiet and the light outside had dimmed into that in-between shade before full dark. She stood in front of the board for a few seconds, not reading now, just standing. Then she took the stylus from its holder and signed her name in small, clean strokes. Miller Q. No fanfare. No announcement. She set the pen down and walked away. A second lieutenant saw it first the next morning and nudged his friend. They both laughed. One asked if she meant to sign someone else up. The other replied it was probably a joke. Word spread quickly. The group chat lit up before breakfast. A screenshot of the bracket made its way through 3 different threads. Underneath it, someone wrote, "Should we call the medic now or after the showcase?" Another cadet added a gif of someone getting launched across a mat. Someone else commented, "At least the belt will match the bruises." Quinn didn't answer. She didn't look at her phone during meals or break. When Lane passed her in the hallway and made a joke loud enough for others to hear, she gave no sign she noticed. She walked the same as always, steady, focused, unbothered. Later that day, Travis Reed saw her in the weight room and asked if she was actually planning to fight. He said it with a grin, with a tone like it was all in fun. She didn't speak. She re-racked her dumbbells, wiped down the bench, and moved to the next set without looking at him. The board updated again before the weekend. Lane versus Miller. That final matchup blinked brighter than the rest. More people gathered in front of it, now pretending to scroll their phones while watching who else looked. Quinn showed up that evening in her usual black joggers and olive jacket. Her headphones were in, but she wasn't listening to music. She stood in front of the bracket again, this time while others watched. She didn't react to the names. She didn't react to the silence behind her. She tapped her ID at the locker door, stepped through, and disappeared from view. Someone whispered that she was either brave or clueless. A few others laughed. The mood around the board wasn't cruel. It was expectant, tilted just enough to feel like people were waiting for her to change her mind. But she didn't. Back at her apartment, the GI was already folded and waiting. Not on display, not in a frame, just resting in the same place it always had, ready when she was. She wasn't signing up to prove a point. She wasn't trying to win anyone over or shut anyone up. She just knew it was time. Not for a fight, but for a return. One quiet name on a screen. One steady step toward a mat that still remembered her. Section 5. Plot twist. When silence speaks louder than pride. 5.1. The setup. The gym didn't look like itself that morning. The usual mats had been swapped for a new set bordered in crimson and perfectly aligned. Folding chairs circled the floor in clean rows, already filled with officers in dress uniforms, family members with programs in hand, and a few wide-eyed children shifting in their seats. A large bracket board glowed at the front of the room. Lane's name sat at the top of the final matchup, bold and white. Below it, slightly dimmer but no less clear, was hers. Miller Q. Most of the guests didn't recognize it. Those who did didn't say anything out loud. Lane stood at the edge of the mat, warming up with flair. His black jai was custom-stitched with silver thread, his sleeves tight and sharp. He moved like someone used to being watched, each kick thrown high, each breath exaggerated for effect. People clapped as he stretched. Travis called something out from the second row, and Lane answered without breaking rhythm. The crowd laughed. The match hadn't started, but the room had already picked a favorite. Quinn entered through the side door. No music, no voiceover. Just her quiet steps on the mat. She wore a plain white GE clean and unadorned, the collar resting flat against her neck. Her hair was tied back in a low knot held with a narrow black ribbon. Some heads turned. Not all. A woman near the back asked if this was an exhibition. A cadet in front whispered something about HR putting on a demo for base morale. No one clapped. No one booed. Most just watched with half interest, waiting for the part they thought would matter. Quinn walked to her corner and bowed once. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't acknowledge Lane. Her breath was slow even. her feet planted lightly the way someone stands when they're used to adjusting mid-fall. On the judge's platform, Kenji Nakamura sat with his hands folded in his lap. His eyes followed her from the moment she stepped into view. He didn't speak, but as she bowed, his brow lifted slightly like a page turning back in memory. He remembered her. The last time he saw that name, it was printed on a bracket, half a world away, next to someone half the size but twice the calm. He didn't nod. He didn't react. But he didn't look away either. Lane rolled his shoulders again, cracking his knuckles, tossing looks toward the crowd. He looked ready. He looked rehearsed. The audience leaned forward, certain they knew how this was going to end. Quinn stood still. She didn't blink at the lights. She didn't shift her weight. She just waited for the signal. Not for them. Not for him. Just for the moment she had already chosen. The quiet before something changed. 5.2 Round 2. The bell for the second round sounded with a crisp tone. Lane bounced on his toes, shaking out his arms, his grin wide and easy. He turned once toward the audience, nodding like he had already won. Quinn didn't move. Her arms were loose-centered. Her feet stayed flat and quiet on the mat. Lane opened with a feint, quick and flashy, the kind of move designed more for effect than function. Quinn didn't flinch. He circled her light on his heels, his breath sharp and loud. He threw another punch wide and fast, then stepped in with a low hook toward her ribs. She shifted. One step, one hand, no wasted motion. She caught his movement mid-turn and used his own weight. Her body rotated cleanly. He lifted, then hit the mat. The sound cracked through the gym like a dropped flagpole. The crowd gasped, not because it looked violent, but because it didn't. Lane stayed down for a second, blinking, then scrambled to his feet, red creeping into his face. He shook his head, trying to pass it off as a slip. The judge raised a hand. 1 point. Quinn bowed. In the third row, a young officer took out his phone. He tapped her name into a browser and froze. A beat later, he turned to the woman beside him and whispered something too fast to follow. She took the phone and stared, her brows lifted. The search results filled the screen. Photos from tournaments, Japanese headlines, old national rankings. One clip showed Quinn in a medal ceremony, her GI soaked with sweat, her face calm. Back on the mat, Lane was bouncing again, but it wasn't the same rhythm. He moved tighter now. Less flair. His eyes didn't leave her. The audience sat forward, no longer chuckling. Phones hovered, not to joke this time, to record. Travis Reed leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, lips pressed. He didn't say anything. No one around him did either. Someone near the wall asked if she had trained overseas. Another voice, softer, said she didn't move like anyone here. Lane reset his stance. Quinn stood motionless, breath slow and steady. The scoreboard blinked quietly. 1-0. And the room finally noticed who had been there the whole time. 5.3. The final move. The third round began without ceremony. The judge dropped his hand and stepped back. Lane came forward like a man trying to erase something. His breath was quick, his feet loud, his eyes locked on hers, no longer smiling. He opened with speed, a front step, a low kick, a driving punch meant to close the distance fast. Quinn didn't back up. She didn't raise her guard. She shifted. Just enough. His momentum met nothing. Then it met her. She stepped into the space between his feet and center. Her right hand rose, not fast, just right. Her palm struck his chest flat and clean. No push, no follow-through, just a single point of contact. All his weight stopped. Lane stumbled back, 2 steps, then 3. His arms flailed for balance. His heel caught on the mat. He stayed upright, but barely. No one moved. No one spoke. The judge raised his hand. Match point. Lane didn't argue. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He looked straight ahead but didn't see much. Quinn bowed, then turned to her corner. The crowd stayed still. Phones lowered slowly. Some forgot they were even holding them. At the edge of the mat, Kenji Nakamura stood. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He stepped forward just enough, then bowed deeply in her direction. His voice, when it came, was quiet, clear, an honor. Quinn bowed again. Same angle, same stillness. There was no applause. Just the sound of someone shifting in a chair. A child whispering to a parent. The hum of the scoreboard resetting. It wasn't that the crowd didn't know what to do. It was that they knew too well. Some victories don't need celebration. Just silence. She stepped off the mat without looking back. her hands relaxed at her sides, her breath calm. And, for the first time all day, no one called her by the wrong name. No one laughed. No one tried to fill the silence. They just watched her walk, understanding too late that they'd been looking in the wrong direction from the very beginning. The locker room felt different now. Hours earlier, it had been full of noise music echoing off tile boots, stomping voices loud with jokes and bets. Now it was quiet enough to hear zippers closing and gear being packed away in careful silence. Cadets moved slowly, their eyes low, their words few and muted. No one asked questions. No one tried to fill the space. Quinn stepped inside, still in her GI, the fabric loose at the collar, her ribbon trailing softly behind her neck. She didn't hurry. She didn't look around for permission. Her belt waited on the top shelf of her locker, right where she had folded it. She reached for it with both hands, tying it without adjusting her stance. The knot sat flat, and even at her center. Travis sat on the bench nearby, hunched forward, his fingers fumbling with the strap on his duffel. He looked up once as she passed. His mouth opened slightly like a question had formed, but didn't know where to land. She didn't stop. She didn't glance at him. Her steps were measured soft against the concrete floor. Lane sat at the far end of the row, elbows on knees, tape still wrapped around his wrists. His GI lay folded beside him, untouched since the match. He didn't move when she passed. His breath came slow, uneven, not from exhaustion, but from something heavier. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. There were no claps, no apologies, no attempts to rewrite what had already been seen. Just a shift in the air, the kind that stays long after the door has closed. The hallway was nearly empty as Quinn stepped out of the locker room. A few cadets stood along the wall, arms folded, eyes following her but saying nothing. She passed them without pause, her GI folded neatly in her arms, her steps light and steady. The door swung open to the night air, cool and still. Lights from the runway blinked in quiet rhythm, painting the pavement in soft flashes of red and blue. The same path she had once walked under the weight of laughter, now stretched open in silence. No one followed. No one needed to. The distance between her and the building behind her held something different now. Her boots clicked gently against the concrete. The gym bag rested on one shoulder. The GI cradled in her arms like a story that didn't need retelling. She didn't look back. There was nothing behind her that hadn't already been answered. At the edge of the lot, mist hung low near the hangars, drifting slow in the light. She moved through it like she belonged there, like she always had. No cheers waited. No final moment of praise. Just space, and the sound of her own footsteps. The quiet no longer felt dismissive. It felt earned. It felt seen. She walked not for applause, but for clarity. What they once called silence was never emptiness. It was purpose. It was peace. And for the first time, the runway didn't feel like something she had to cross. It felt like hers.